On the evening of June 21st, 2013, the ordinary bustle of a Jacksonville, Florida, Walmart became the backdrop of one of the most disturbing crimes in recent American memory. An 8-year-old girl, Cherish Lily Perrywinkle, accompanied her mother, Rain, and 2 younger siblings, had gone shopping for clothes when they encountered a man who seemed generous, courteous, and harmless. He told them his name was Donald James Smith. He said he had a gift card he did not need and wanted to help them buy some summer clothes. He even promised them dinner. In a world where acts of kindness are rare, the offer felt like a blessing. Within hours, that simple act of misplaced trust would end in the death of a child and a national reckoning over how a known sexual predator could walk freely among families. The Perrywinkle case is not only a tragedy of personal devastation, it is also a case study in system collapse, where parole oversight, interagency communication, and public safety procedures failed simultaneously. Cherish Perrywinkle was born in 2004, the first of 3 girls raised primarily by her mother, Rain. Life was difficult. The family lived close to poverty, depending on community aid and public support. But by all accounts, Cherish was radiant, bright in spirit, social, and deeply attached to her mother and sisters. On that June evening, Rain had taken her daughters to Walmart after receiving a small amount of child support money. The goal was simple, to stretch every dollar on clothing. As they browsed the aisles, Donald Smith approached them. Smith was 56 years old, thin, balding, and spoke with the calm assurance of a man used to manipulating people. He struck up a conversation, offering help, invoking sympathy, and suggesting he could assist Rain with clothes for the children. Unbeknownst to her, Smith had a long criminal history. His record stretched back to the 1970s and included kidnapping, sexual assault, and impersonation of public officials. He had been designated a registered sex offender and had been released from prison only 3 weeks earlier. To Rain, however, he appeared as a kind stranger with good intentions. She was cautious at first, but gradually disarmed by his apparent gentleness and paternal tone. When he mentioned that his wife was meeting them for dinner at the McDonald's inside the store, Rain accepted. That fabricated domestic detail, a non-existent wife, was his final act of deceit. Surveillance footage later reconstructed the timeline. For nearly 2 hours, Smith and the Perrywinkles were seen moving through the store. He paid attention to the children, joked, and continued to build trust. At around 10 p.m., Smith told Rain he would buy food while she finished shopping. Moments later, when she looked around, both Smith and Cherish were gone. Realizing the danger almost immediately, Rain ran through the aisles and out into the parking lot. Her frantic call to 911, placed at 10:11 p.m., was recorded in full. She told dispatchers that a man had taken her daughter, that he had lied about having a wife, and that she feared the worst. Within minutes, police began tracing the suspect. The situation escalated to a statewide Amber Alert. Investigators identified Donald Smith within an hour. He had previously been flagged as high risk, and his name surfaced quickly through local offender databases. Patrol units searched for his white Dodge van, described by witnesses. By dawn, officers found the vehicle parked near a church several miles from the Walmart. Smith was inside and was arrested on the spot. A subsequent search of the surrounding wooded area led to the recovery of Cherish's body. The child's death had occurred within hours of her abduction. While the details of the assault were withheld from the public, the autopsy and forensic evidence confirmed Smith's involvement beyond any doubt. DNA, fiber traces, and his prior history formed an airtight case. Understanding this crime requires understanding its perpetrator. Donald James Smith's criminal career began decades earlier. He was first arrested in the 1970s for sexual offenses involving minors, and his behavior followed a consistent pattern: charm, deception, abduction, and abuse. In 1992, he was sentenced for kidnapping and attempted assault of a child, serving a short term before being released on supervision. Despite warnings from psychologists describing him as a lifelong sexual predator with compulsive tendencies, Smith cycled in and out of prison repeatedly. His final release, in May 2013, came after a sentence for impersonating a public employee while attempting to lure a child. Despite recommendations for civil commitment to a psychiatric facility, he was freed under standard reporting conditions. Smith's case file showed multiple failures. Miscommunication between probation officers and state corrections officials. Inadequate GPS tracking and monitoring capacity. A lack of resources for psychological reevaluation upon release. Each failure combined to place one of Florida's most dangerous offenders back into public life, unsupervised. When news of Cherish Perrywinkle's death broke, Jacksonville was overcome with collective grief and anger. Candlelight vigils spread through the city, and thousands gathered at her elementary school to mourn a child many had never met. What infuriated the community most was not only the crime itself, but the knowledge that it could have been prevented. Reporters uncovered that Smith had violated parole conditions numerous times in the past. He had been a subject of repeated warnings from mental health evaluators who described him as highly likely to offend again if released. Public confidence in the Florida Department of Corrections collapsed. Editorials across the state demanded answers. How could a man with such a record be free? Why had the system failed to track him? Who was responsible for protecting the public? The trial of Donald Smith began in February 2018, nearly 5 years after the crime. Prosecutors presented a meticulous timeline drawn from surveillance, phone records, forensic evidence, and eyewitness accounts. They established premeditation. Smith had spent hours earlier that day visiting other stores, approaching families with similar offers of assistance. Cherish was not his first target. She was the one who trusted him. During the proceedings, the court avoided sensationalism. Instead, it focused on the pattern of grooming and the undeniable proof of Smith's guilt. The defense offered no plausible counterargument. Smith showed no remorse, no emotion, and declined to testify. After less than 15 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty of first-degree murder, sexual battery, and kidnapping. The sentencing phase was equally swift. The judge, addressing Smith directly, said, "Your actions represent premeditated evil. You have forfeited the right to live among the people of this state." Donald Smith was sentenced to death. He remains on Florida's death row at the time of writing. Rain Perrywinkle became both a figure of compassion and controversy. The cruelty of public judgment added to her grief. Many questioned how she could have trusted a stranger. In her testimony, she explained her reasoning. Smith had acted fatherly, invoking empathy by saying he wanted to help. He spoke softly, mentioned a wife and grandchildren, and seemed harmless in the brightly lit store. Her experience underscores a vital sociological lesson. Predators rely on social scripts of kindness and civility to lower defenses. Most people are socialized to trust apparent goodwill, especially when it appears to benefit children. The community's later support for Rain was overwhelming. Churches, child advocacy organizations, and civic groups offered counseling and financial aid. She chose to channel her pain into advocacy, appearing in local forums to speak about stranger grooming and urging parents never to underestimate manipulation. The Perrywinkle case catalyzed major reviews in Florida's criminal justice system. A. Offender tracking reform. Florida lawmakers intensified GPS monitoring for high-risk offenders. Agencies were required to maintain real-time databases shared across counties and update supervision protocols weekly. B. Civil commitment procedures. The case revived the debate on Jimmy Rice Act provisions, which allow for the post-sentence civil commitment of sexually violent predators. Critics had argued that the system lacked funding and psychological evaluators. After Cherish's death, funding increased and review boards expanded. C. Public awareness initiatives. Child safety curricula were rewritten to emphasize digital grooming and situational awareness in public places. The Florida Department of Children and Families launched a public campaign titled Know Before You Trust, using Cherish case as a study example. These reforms, though bureaucratic in nature, were driven by a moral consensus. Such a crime must never be allowed to happen again. From a criminological standpoint, Donald Smith embodies the archetype of a repeat predatory offender whose behavior is rooted in chronic pathology rather than opportunism. Research by Knight and Prentke, 1990, describes such individuals as compulsive recidivists with diminished empathy and persistent cognitive distortions. Every rehabilitation program Smith underwent failed because his motivation was not external. It was psychosexual fixation reinforced by deception as a method of control. This understanding reframes discussions about punishment versus prevention. While lengthy incarceration protects society temporarily, it does not address underlying compulsion. Effective prevention requires continuous monitoring, mental health evaluation, and rapid enforcement of parole violations, elements missing in Smith's case. The Perrywinkle tragedy illustrates how social vulnerability intersects with predation. Rain's socioeconomic hardship, isolation, and maternal instinct made her receptive to offers of kindness. Predators exploit empathy. They detect need and present themselves as solutions. Smith's manipulation technique, a fabricated narrative of generosity, fits the psychological model of target-based grooming. It begins with small favors, moves toward emotional bonding, and culminates in opportunity. Education programs now stress situational red flags rather than generalized fear. Adults offering unsolicited gifts or transportation. Unverified claims of employment or connections. Isolation of a child under the pretext of assistance. These lessons, drawn from Cherish case, are used in training modules for teachers, law enforcement, and parents nationwide. Media coverage of the Perrywinkle case was intense and, at times, ethically fraught. Early headlines sensationalized the narrative, often focusing on the mother's decision instead of the offender's manipulation. Subsequent reflection by journalists led to an important shift in reporting ethics. Outlets such as the Florida Times-Union and The Guardian began including expert commentary from criminologists and psychologists, reframing the discussion toward systemic accountability and child protection rather than blame. This evolution in media practice mirrors broader societal understanding. Compassion, not condemnation, yields prevention. 10 years after Cherish's death, her name endures in public memory through education and advocacy. Cherish the Children Foundation supports programs for families affected by violent crime. Law enforcement agencies still use her case in officer training on predator profiling. Annual memorial runs in Jacksonville raise funds for child protection initiatives. Her story has also influenced national discourse on sentencing for repeat sexual offenders. Legislators reference her name during debates on mandatory life sentences for serial child predators. In this way, Cherish's short life continues to protect countless others. From an ethical standpoint, the Perrywinkle case challenges society's belief in rehabilitation. Can habitual offenders be reformed, or does public safety require permanent containment? Philosophers of justice like Rawls and Nussbaum remind us that a society is judged by how it protects its most vulnerable members. The failure in this case was not individual but collective, rooted in administrative oversight and the underestimation of human depravity. The moral imperative arising from this tragedy is prevention through vigilance, robust systems, informed citizens, and compassionate yet cautious social interaction. Cherish Perrywinkle's story is, above all, a reminder of fragility, of how innocence can vanish within the ordinary rhythms of daily life. She was a child whose greatest joy that evening was choosing a new dress. Her death was not the result of parental neglect or chance. It was the calculated act of a predator whom the system had already identified and yet failed to contain. The community that grieved her transformed its sorrow into resolve. Laws were tightened, awareness deepened, and generations of children have since been taught to recognize danger before it whispers kindness. Cherish's name, ironically prophetic, now stands as both a plea and a command to cherish the children, to guard them fiercely, and to never again allow bureaucratic failure to silence innocence. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every story we tell here is more than just a case. It's a life that mattered, a voice that deserves to be remembered. Your support helps us continue to share their stories and bring awareness to the truth behind these tragedies. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below and share your thoughts. We read every single one. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering Cherish Perrywinkle with